This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for the Intentionality Gurus with Candace Pollock. And before we went online, Candace and I were chatting a little bit, and I mentioned that the topic today sounds a little interesting, but questionable for many of us, because the title is Be Good at Failing. And I wasn't taught to fail. I was always taught that, you had to fake it till you made it, really. So talk to us, Candace, about why we should feel good about failing.
Well, Dr. Amy Edmondson, who is a professor at Harvard Business School, has written about this, and in her book, First Learn to Fail, all right? Oh, I'm sorry, the right kind of wrong, the science of failing well. And she is saying that in our internet age and future, the likelihood that we're going to fail will increase exponentially. And the whole point is, how do we respond to that? Do we do it effectively, or do we do it dysfunctionally, or less than optimally? Maybe I'll be kind and put it that way. And the idea is, we talked about saying not being a good resource, and that was on some level in a prior episode we talked about that. But on some level, we have a sense that it's not right for us to say no to things, or to not be effective at it, in a way to set boundaries for ourselves and not have other people kind of delegate work to us. But there's an element of we're not doing it properly, or there's a failure element to it. So my radar has been a little sensitized to, this is kind of interesting, just pushing those paradigms. And then I came across a New York Times article recently with J.C. Duncan, and I catch her column from time to time, but it was about failure, and I was just really fascinated. So she talks about Edmonton's work, and the point of it is, we train for success, but we don't train for failure. And failure is an inevitable part of our lives. And Edmondson's research shows that it's going to be more and more prevalent as things get more complex, and so on. And so we should think about it. What do you think?
Well, as I said to you before we started today, I wasn't brought up to fail. In fact, failure or mistakes, you got a slap on the hand for it. And it usually was, why did you do that wrong? Not instead of, how could you have done it differently? Or what can we learn from it? And I still have that problem today of feeling like if I fail at something, it almost takes over my whole persona, that I'm not good at anything.
Yeah, something really existential, like, that we could be, almost banished, shamed.
Right.
It's just so many things. And I share that. And in my day job, I used to really fuss over just the right phrasing of a particular argument, or, a point, as if that was going to make or break the whole, situation. And, it's insane, because you do the best job you can. And I really love that Edmondson, she has some YouTube videos that she talks about Edison. Thomas Edison was famous for trying, I think more than 1,000, more than 10,000, depending on which person is talking about his invention of the light bulb. But somebody asked him about, well, gee, you failed 1,000 times or 10,000 times. And he said, I didn't fail. I discovered 1,000 or 10,000, whatever that number was, ways that it didn't work until I found the way it did. And, that's just such a powerful perspective. And to be able to, inform our own perspective on life with that, that blameless discernment. Okay,
Right.
this didn't work. I'm going to try X. What were the elements that made it not work, and so on. And then, JC's article in the New York Times, coupled with exploring these things, I started diving in. Well, I attended a weekend program, and they talked about growth mindset versus fixed mindset based on Carol Dweck's work, her famous book on that. And in this program, we did an exercise that addressed whether we had a fixed mindset for our own, exploration in 5 categories. And this just really stimulated me, because as much as I like to think of myself as somebody with an open mindset, I was able to find the margins of where, I was bordering into fixed mindset. So the 5 categories, so I think this could be a fun game, are 1, challenges. So where do we think, oh no, this is too big for me? I remember when I went to law school, I was going through a divorce. I was running my paralegal business, and I was going to law school at night. And, the divorce was just like, making me have brain fog and everything else. And I remember, calling my mom in New York and basically expressing, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can, do all of these things at one time. And she said, oh dear, God doesn't give you anything you can't handle. And my response was, I think he's got the wrong house,
Yeah.
the person. Right. But, I did it. I came up with solutions for it and so on. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't pleasant in many ways, but it was done.
Right.
So what about you in terms of challenges that you might think that are the limit, the end of your universe, but maybe there's a scoosh more that might be available if you were thinking in terms of, is this a fixed mindset, or is this I can learn from it mindset?
Well, it's interesting. This morning, I went to print something on this printer here. It's fairly new, and I put in photo paper. Okay, so I followed all the directions, that you tell it it's photo paper, and everything else, and it didn't want to work. It just gave me this error message that I have the wrong paper in there. And I was getting frustrated because it wasn't my error. It was the error of this mechanical thing. And I called my husband in and I showed him what the issue was. And he said, well, just start all over again, reboot. And it was like, I don't want to reboot. Okay.
It was wrong. It shouldn't have
Right.
done this.
Yes. And so I did reboot to so-called please him, and the same error came up. And so I finally changed everything and I said, okay, what can I learn from this? It doesn't see the paper. So I took the photo paper out, put regular paper in, and hit print. And guess what? It printed. And so I felt joyous that I had learned something. Okay.
Mhm.
For whatever reason, this doesn't want to read my photo paper. And so I found another solution by making what may have been a mistake. But a lot of times we get ourselves, at least I do, I get myself so frustrated over believing that I'm doing something correctly and that the universe is against me, the printer, the computer, or something else. And I don't learn from it at that point because that's my fixed mindset.
Yeah. So how does it feel to say that out loud, to be able to identify that little margin of fixed mindset? And it's not going to take you further, but somehow you persevered and you got into growth mindset. So
Right. It felt good because here I had this outside source, my husband, trying to tell me that I was doing something wrong. And I may have been, but because I couldn't identify exactly what that wrong was, I found another way around it because I opened up and said, okay, there's got to be another way.
Mhm.
And what I was printing really didn't have to be on photo paper. And so it was just like, okay, I got this now, and I can learn from this. I can, at some other point when I have more time, I can try to research how to use the photo paper.
Well, and I think that's the point, that we learned from this and we recognized, okay, I went like 2 steps beyond the border between fixed mindset and growth mindset. And then the next time you might go 2 steps further because, you've taken yourself to that level. And just for those who may not be familiar with Carol Dweck's book, she in her research discovered that the fixed mindset are people who think that they're born with certain aptitudes and intelligence and talent, and every challenge is a test of whether they're going to measure up. And so it's fraught with a lot of potential angst, whether they're fully conscious of that. And so they resist those opportunities to learn rather than embrace them. And if you're not good at something, it's more or less, well, that's just the way I am. I'm right-handed or left-handed. I can't learn to, if I'm right-handed, I can't learn to write with my left hand, when in fact we show that, those things are possible. I mean, look at people that are born without arms and other extremities and the ways they've been able to adapt. The growth mindset is where we have the intelligence and talent of maybe a normal person, but we are also fully aware or have had the experience that we can develop more of that. And, I'm not really great at plumbing, but I had an episode years and years ago. I had some rental property. And long story short, I was changing the little loop pipe at the bottom of my sink. It had a clog in it. Or I think I dropped something and I can't remember. But anyway, I was able to undo that. Everything was fine. And then I had a bucket where some water was in it. It had collected there. So I poured it into the bucket. And then I turned around and I poured it into the sink. I hadn't replaced the pipe piece. So now it just went on the floor. And, I remember vividly that experience because I was thinking, Candy, you dunce, like what were you doing? All right. So I beat myself up, and then I said to myself, I'm not any good at it. And then much later years, I learned how to do some of those things more effectively. YouTube videos have just been great for those things. Sometimes I would watch something again and again and again. I'm still trying to figure out how to blur my background on Zoom, but I can't find that button. I just haven't had the time to do it. I'm not thinking that I'm not good at it. So,
and don't you think that's usually the case, is that so many of us are always in a hurry? We have things that we want to do, need to do, and have to do. And so if it doesn't go right the first time,
yes,
it's very easy just to say, I don't know how to do it. I'm going to call, or I'm going to ask somebody else. And I've been, I know that you compliment me on my technical expertise, but it's not so much that I have that expertise, but my husband, who has it, when I ask how to do something, he really forces me to figure it out. And I understand that now. I didn't in the beginning. And when I'm tired, sometimes I don't understand it. It's like, hey, just do it for me.
Answer.
But it's like, but you know how to do it. Take a step back, think about it. And, it is that open mindset and learning that, yeah, I can do this.
So we talked about challenges. The second thing in that exercise we did is obstacles. So, entrepreneurs may not have enough money. There was somebody recently, a former client, who ran into some legal problem, and they didn't have the money to pay the attorney's retainer fee. And I said, try a GoFundMe option, if possible, because according to what the facts that they'd been given to me, this was something that wasn't this guy's fault, and he had the the burden, the financial burden of trying to prove his position and so on. Maybe somebody out there would be sympathetic to that. But the third one I really love. And so the idea of where we may have a fixed mindset and a sense that, giving up and failing based on our level of effort. So where might that show up for you? This was kind of confronting for me, like maybe I didn't persevere enough.
Well, I think the level of effort is if you get yourself frustrated too quickly, you're not going to pursue. You're going to just stop in your tracks, at least for me. And that was my first reaction this morning when I wasn't getting the printing to go properly. I almost just said, forget it. I can't do it. And then it was like this light bulb went up and out and said, yes, you can. Not exactly the way you want to, but you can do it another way.
Yeah. So just being mindful of, there's that fork in the road. We can say, okay, I'm going to stop here, or I'm just going to persevere a little more. Maybe not in that moment, maybe later when we do have time, because, we all tend to be oversubscribed to things. The fourth one is criticism. This is, one of my Achilles heels. Where does criticism, we'll call it feedback from others, come in? Some of it drive by, not requested, as if there's a committee out there that they're entitled to say things, sometimes to your face and sometimes harshly. Sometimes just, I'll just tell a story. I think I've mentioned it before. My mom was moving from we called it the big house. It wasn't a big house, but it was where she had lived for 40 years into a small village nearby. And she had movers and they were taking things out, but I was taking some of the fragile things and packing them and putting them in the car that we would personally take to the condo. And it was a brutally hot August day, really humid, which was unusual for that area. And I had, workout clothes on basically, and I was muscling things and so on. So I get back home in Ohio and I find out from my sisters that my mom had said to them, Candy worked really hard, but, I wish she would wear more blusher. It's like, what? Really? And, here I am, this is like 20 years later, that's still kind of like just as a little burr in my sock or something. Like, well, Mom, like really, I was probably blushing from the flush from the heat and the humidity that day. But of all the things, you know what I mean?
Yep. I face this a lot, and sometimes I wonder if it's what I am choosing to hear,
Yeah.
or what is really being said. Yesterday, somebody on LinkedIn wrote me. I don't know them, but they're obviously somehow connected to me. And they said, I see that you've started a coaching business. What gives you the right? You're a podcaster, not a coach. And my first reaction was to respond to them. And I thought, that's their thought pattern. Okay. I can't take their thoughts and make it ruin my day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's probably one of the first times in a long time that I actually, I've been sort of laughing about it. It's like, I don't even really know them. They don't know me. And there's something else underlying in that comment. And you know what? I don't have the interest to pursue it.
Yeah,
It feels
exactly.
good.
And I think it may come from AA or something, but I've heard the phrase, don't give them free rent in your brain. Like don't give it the time of day, in essence. And so there's a lot to be said for that. And recognizing that I have a dear, dear friend. I love her in many, many ways. She's just a big, big heart. But she often will say things out loud in front of people. So anyway, we were in a class together. We were sitting literally across the table from the instructor. And she turns to me and kind of like in a stage aside. I mean, there was no whispering here. This was like a little more than normal volume in speaking. And she turns to me and she said, Candy, this teacher is lousy. I don't think she knows what she's doing. And I'm just, oh, okay.
Oh, God.
This is a little awkward. And but that's how she is. She'll tell you, to your face, oh, you shouldn't wear that. It's like, okay, so this is what you take her or leave her with this.
Right.
But all of her redeeming qualities totally offset that. But if she thinks it, and she's not older, if she thinks it, it comes out of her mouth, and she doesn't mean any harm by it. But it sometimes has a little bit of a little choke chain effect to it.
Absolutely.
So then the last one in that exercise, in that program that I attended, that weekend program, was whether we had fixed or growth mindset around the success of others. So when I say that, what occurs to you?
I think sometimes the success of others is difficult for us. And I think sometimes we think to ourselves that maybe they don't have the right to succeed or get any higher.
Or maybe they had advantages we didn't have,
Right.
They inherited money, or they have certain talents that we don't have, or they're not as sensitive, so they're kind of mercenary, or too much of an ego. There's a whole litany of things that we can be thinking of, or our situation doesn't allow that amount of work to gain that same success, when it may be just a matter of effort, or
Right.
how we perceive challenges and so on. We don't know how many failures they've gone through, and so on. So Edmondson, the person who wrote the book in terms of The Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well, that J.C. Duncan talks about in the New York Times article, basically says that we need to plan for failure, all right, know that it's going to be there. And she talks about what's her name, sorry, I can't read. Oh, no, Sarah Blakely, who was the founder of Spanx, that
Right.
shapewear inventor, and who's uber successful and so on. And the fascinating thing is, and I've read about this before, her dad would encourage the kids to fail, and he would at the dinner table ask, what did you fail at today or this week?
Interesting.
And then he would be disappointed if they didn't fail at anything. So in JC's article, she talks about how Sarah, apparently a very shy person, ran for school, something or other, I think in high school, against the most popular girl, and lost. But she learned a lot of things. And I can't imagine doing that. I don't know about you, but if, going in knowing, okay, I'm going to learn some things. But in some ways, I think I do know, because the phrase that I heard years ago that I've adopted that helped me get to being like a almost so shy that I wouldn't speak up at all, to being, candid Candy, almost speaking up, not quite like my friend, but somewhat candidly. But the idea of daring to be ugly. It's like, okay, I'm going to throw my head over the fence and figure it out. All right. And that's just opened up so many more opportunities. My younger sister often will ask what I used to consider impertinent questions. And one time I said, Dawn, you can't do that. And she said, oh, I want to know. And I thought, okay, head slap to the forehead. Yeah, duh. Why not? It's her business, not mine. But what do you think about in terms of the idea of daring to be ugly in some of these situations?
I'm getting better at it as I get more mature, I guess is a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was afraid to ask questions for the answers that I thought I needed. And I guess that came from, I had a mother who would say anything at any time, almost like your friend,
Mhm.
and then apologize later. 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 but I didn't want to be like that. So I held it all in. And it is difficult for me to sometimes ask the questions, because I wonder if I'm this people pleaser. I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings.
Mhm. Yeah, so it can inhibit us from taking, just exploring some things that may be beneficial to the other person as well as to the ourselves. And I think I mentioned Dawn where she had a friend who I think she wanted to say something to the friend just about something my sister was working on, nothing about the other person. And the other person, who apparently was pretty wise, said, "Wait a minute. So tell me, are you asking me for my input, or are you asking me as just to hear you speak?" And it was a real like, okay, let me think about this. Which do I want from this conversation? But we can be thinking in terms of you know just those forks in the road. Which fork, is there a fork? There's generally more than one. And which one do we want to choose to take today? There's a phrase in Edmondson's work called psychological safety. And so that's where there's a lot of that sense of not venturing through the fixed mindset into the growth mindset, or accepting failure, that it's a given, it's going to be there, is in part due to trying to preserve our psychological safety, what we feel comfortable with. And I just love that phrase because, in Sarah Blakely's family, it was okay to do those things. There was no teasing. There was actually, applause apparently. And how freeing that is.
Totally different for many of us,
Totally.
and I think that, boy, if I look back, I almost wish I had been brought up that way, that I wouldn't have been so stifled in many ways.
Yeah, exactly. Other opportunities might show up. So Duncan outlines Edmonton's books and so on, and she's talking. The phrase she uses is building a healthy relationship with mistakes and failure, and I just thought that was a beautiful phrase. So somebody else wrote about all of this. John Maxwell wrote "Failing Forward," and he talks about how the successful people, there's that fork in the road. So you either lapse backward and say, "I'm not trying that again," or you venture forward and try and see, what opportunities are there. And then that kind of gets us into positive intelligence, a gift or opportunity from almost any setback. And Edmondson talks about putting our failures in context. And just, I think, acknowledging that this is what's going on can be important. The brain tends to catastrophize failures with psychological and emotional response of fear. So our body is literally kind of in the fear, flight, or freeze framework. And if we just say, okay, this is a necessary life experience, I wish it hadn't been like this brutal, possibly, but okay, I'm going to adopt this and take it on, and using positive intelligence language, blameless discernment in terms of just, looking at it. And
as you're talking about failure, it just takes me back to the classroom. And, maybe I knew how to spell all the words, but now I take the test and I get a 70% or I get a 60% because I just either forgot, or in writing out the word, I accidentally put an I before an E or whatever. I used to be terrified to get a test back with mistakes on it. And that has led me to today. It's like, if I wasn't perfect in school, I made all these mistakes, I'm going to keep making them.
Well, and I share that. I do the New York Times news quiz every Friday, and I hate it when I don't get a perfect score. And where I always trip up is, and I know this, but I don't always, change things. I'll read the question incorrectly. I'll go too fast and read the question incorrectly. I don't tend to stay on top of sports news. I tend to stay on top of, national and international news and other things. And I'm not so great on, who the latest Hollywood stars are. Not that they necessarily cover that so much in the New York Times, but I don't like it when so I'll go back over and I'll read up on that little thing just because I want to be ready for the next time. And
Right.
so I guess that's a skill that I've adopted over time. I mean, it's a very time consuming skill. But Edmondson talks about learning how to pivot from the shame, the fixed mindset, and the self-sabotaging, to use the positive intelligence stuff, and explore alternative actions and possibilities. So and this phrase I thought was so beautiful. A failure is an end, but a pivot looks forward rather than backward. So with a failure, the road stops. That's it. We're not learning anything. We're hitting the margins of the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And so this is where we can explore habitual ways we tend to approach things. So for me, if it's technology, I know my first reaction is going to be, annoyance, blah, 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 blah. And then I can just get over it. But learning the two ingredients of failing well are that it will produce a reduction in shame and the feeling of being less worthy, and actually a sense of connection, because we don't share our failures with others. Everybody, well, I can't say everybody, but a lot of people hide it. And so she talks about sharing failures, particularly in work situations, having a culture where those can be shared, because when we don't share those things, she talks about a couple of calamities where the Air Florida, I forget what the name of the airline was, flew north to and crashed in the Potomac River. They kind of rotely went through their checklist, and de-icers on, no. Well, that would have been appropriate in Florida, but it wasn't appropriate if they were flying north and the conditions were colder, and that's what caused the accident where 69 people died. So the idea is that we can create our own personal culture of failing, and we can encourage others to do the same.
Wow.
So what do you think would be a takeaway or something that people could do that are listening?
We have to be kinder to ourselves. We almost have to do a self-care when it comes to failures, and accept the fact that we're not going to be perfect every time, and that we can make those corrections, and those corrections, are going to be made differently, so, I like your idea that if you get a question wrong, you go back and you research it so that the next time you're going to have the information that you need. And, that's basically what we all need to do if we want to succeed. And succeed does not always mean that we're winning or that we're always right. We're just moving forward.
Yeah, and I love that. And for me, it was an acquired skill, because I certainly had a fixed mindset before, and I've been pushing the margins on that. And I think the other thing is to recognize that what Maxwell and Edmondson's research and Carol Dweck's research shows is that it's necessary. It's an unavoidable aspect. So we might as well deal with it, get used to it, and always be on the lookout for those forks in the road where we have a choice.
Sounds good, especially on the beginning of the week. We have something to look forward to and to open our minds up about. I appreciate that.
Great.
And we will be back in a couple weeks. So thanks, Candace. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye-bye.